Okay, good afternoon, everybody. And I want to thank my colleagues, Senators Durbin, Murray, Stabenow, and Brown. You'll hear from each of them seriatim, as they say in Brooklyn. Okay, as you know, yesterday, the Senate passed a continuing resolution to reopen the government, provide a 6-year reauthorization of CHIP, and Leader McConnell and I were also able to agree on a path forward for legislation to protect Dreamers. The Republican majority now has 16 days to prevent the 800,000 young Dreamers from being deported. Democrats are going to be working as hard as ever to get a bill that will pass the Senate. But the pressure is on Leader McConnell and the moderates, particularly the Republican moderates. The clock is ticking. Leader McConnell made a promise, not just to Democrats, but to Republicans as well. We expect him to keep his word to the body, and I was glad to hear that he reiterated it a few minutes ago right here. We now also have 3 weeks to conclude other important work, each equally as important as the next. On the budget, we must lift spending caps for defense and urgent domestic priorities. Just as our military needs the resources it requires to do the tough job we ask of them, we have critical issues to address here at home, and you're going to hear about some of them from my colleagues. It includes making the necessary investments to fight the scourge of opioid addiction, which has a stranglehold on so many communities across the country. In the light of the Trump administration's constant abdication of leadership when it comes to the opioid crisis. A lot of committees, a lot of talk, no action. It is important now more than ever for Congress to take immediate action. Not only has the President failed to nominate someone to head the Office of National Drug Control Policy, guess what? This administration, which talks a big game about opioids, just proposed cutting the agency's budget by 95%. That's one of the most destructive contributions that the President has made to combat the opioid epidemic, and the effects of this broken promise ripple across the country. We also have to honor the promise made to over 1 million pensioners who contributed to and earned every penny of their pensions. You'll hear about that later. We have to fund community health centers and other important health programs that have lapsed. You'll hear about those. And we also have to do more for our brave veterans to get the kind of quality health care they deserve. They didn't wait in line in Iraq and Afghanistan. They shouldn't be waiting in line here. And, of course, we have to pass a disaster relief package that addresses the needs of all our states and territories fairly: Texas, Florida, Louisiana, California, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, and the western states that are plagued by fire. Unfortunately, on every one of these important issues, the President has been impossible to pin down, or he's been completely absent. President Trump's inability to negotiate with Congress is what caused the 3-day government shutdown from which we've just emerged. It's causing the fact that we're not making more progress on these issues. Our Republican leaders don't want to go ahead on their own. They're afraid of President Trump. They want to know what he'll do, but he doesn't tell them to do anything, and he usually tells them, you do it yourselves. We get paralysis. Now, if we're going to get all these things going, the Senate is probably going to have to work its will on its own. We're ready. The American people are clamoring for our two parties to work together and get these things done. The bipartisan group yesterday was a glimmer of hope that might happen, and I'm encouraging them to move forward. After years of partisanship and strife, during which Republicans hardly attempted to compromise, if we're going to finish all these important tasks at hand, we have to move forward in a bipartisan way. Senator Durbin.
Thank you very much, Senator Schumer. Some people look at a donut and just see the hole. I'm not one of those people. Where are we today when it comes to DACA and Dreamers as compared to last week? Significant positive things have occurred. Yesterday and over the weekend, a significant group, a bipartisan group of senators came together and committed themselves to moving forward with the DREAM Act and other immigration issues. There are more speaking in favor of the DREAM Act today than there were a week ago. We've secured a guarantee on the floor from Majority Leader McConnell that for the first time in 5 years, we will finally debate and vote on immigration and DACA issues. Now we have a process. We can finally resolve the fate of hundreds of thousands of dreamers who are American in every way but for a piece of paper. The final decision on whether this idea becomes a law, though, still rests in the hands of the Republican leaders in terms of what they bring to the floor. We have a clear statement from Senator McConnell as to the process that we will follow, the level playing field, the open amendment process. We don't have a similar statement from the Speaker of the House, and he is in complete control of the measures that come before the House on the floor. If we are going to have a bipartisan solution, we need the leaders of the House and Senate to come together and agree that we have a path moving forward. We now have 16 days to work with Democrats to produce legislation. Republican Majority Leader has 16 days to work with Democrats to produce legislation that can pass the House and the Senate. Now, I might add that there is a parallel track here of the whips or number twos, whatever our characterization is at the moment. We have been unable to meet this week because the House is in recess. I stand ready and willing to attend any meeting that can be productive and constructive to move forward on this issue. I've been waiting 17 years since I introduced the DREAM Act for this day. There's a lot at stake, not just in terms of my political investment, but even more important, the lives of these young people and their family. They deserve the opportunity to be part of America's future.
Senator Murray.
Well, thank you. You know, the bare minimum for a party in control of the Senate, the House, and the White House is keeping the government open. That is the absolute bare minimum. So it's good that Republican leaders were able to keep the lights on for a few more weeks. To be very clear, we have a lot more to do than the bare minimum. So I'm glad Republican leaders have committed to working with us to deliver on some of the challenges facing the families we represent. But in the coming weeks, people are going to be looking for action and true bipartisan work, not just words. As Senator Durbin just talked about, Democrats and Republicans agree. We need to finally pass legislation to protect our dreamers who have known no home but America and who live in constant fear for their future. Republican leaders made a commitment on this. We're going to be holding them to it. We all know we need to increase investments in health care and education and other domestic and defense priorities. That's something Speaker Ryan and I were able to do in 2013, and I am confident it can be done again. And I just want to focus on two important issues within that. Democrats and Republicans agree we need to do more to fulfill our promise to the brave men and women who served our country. Because right now there are far too many veterans around this country who are facing long wait times for health care and barred from the critical caregiver program because of when they served or sleeping on the streets. And now that this Republican shutdown has ended, there is no reason we should not be able to work together to address that quickly. Democrats and Republicans also agree we need to make sure that patients and families who rely on community health centers, teaching health centers, and other critical health care investments will continue to get the health care that they need. Now, I'm very glad we were able to pass the extension of children's health care, but now we need to work together to tackle those other critical health care issues that Republicans have now allowed to expire. Because there's no excuse for leaving families wondering whether their local health care center will shut its doors, or leaving our medical residents who want to help underserved communities in limbo, which is happening now. And I know we can put a stop to this uncertainty without gutting other investments in public health care. There are bipartisan solutions on all these challenges and the many that we face. And now that Republicans have stepped back from their completely unnecessary government shutdown and say they are ready to work with us on responsible solutions, we need to tackle these right now, together, without delay. People across the country are going to be holding Republican leaders accountable for their commitments and for their responsibilities, and we will be as well.
Thank you, Senator Murray. Senator Stabenow.
Thank you. Let me just stress what Senator Murray was talking about in terms of the Children's Health Insurance Program. We started in the Finance Committee with a bipartisan bill in order to make sure that the Children's Health Insurance Program did not expire by September 30th, and to put that in place. And then I came to the floor, other members of our caucus came to the floor week after week after week, 114 days before children's health insurance was reauthorized. But the good news is, instead of a 2-year reauthorization, as has happened the last time around, we were able to get 6 years of full funding with increases, and that is a real victory for children and families in Michigan and all across the country, 9 million children across the country. But we've got a lot of unfinished business to do, including now the second piece, which is community health centers. The refusal to act means that 25 million people across our country, including 300,000 veterans, right now, and 7.5 million children right now, find their health center in jeopardy because Republicans would not do what we have traditionally done, which is reauthorize CHIP and community health centers at the same time. And so we have children in Michigan, 225,000 in fact. A third of our children go to health centers, a third of the people going to health centers are children, and so we're in a situation where you may have the health insurance, but the health center is closed. You can't see your doctor. So that's very, very high on our list. Democrats are focused on making sure we get that done as soon as possible for the 25 million people who count on community health centers across our country. We are also very focused on our veterans, as Senator Murray focused on, Senator Schumer talked about. Our veterans shouldn't stand in the back of any line, and certainly not for health care, which has been promised to them. And I want to focus on infrastructure. We have veterans clinics in Michigan that are too small to meet the demand for services, hospitals that need to be renovated to be able to care for our veterans. We are focused on doing everything we can for our veterans, including mental health services as well. And finally, in the middle of an opioid epidemic that's destroying families and communities across our country, any budget agreement has to have important funding to fight opioids and not leave our families and communities behind. There have been short-term deals for too long. The job needs to get done long-term. That's what we were focused on. Commitments, of course, for children covered by DACA, and also to make sure that the funding priorities that the American people, middle-class families, working families, expect us to come forward with for them get achieved. It's time to come together, get things done for our families, our veterans, and our communities.
Thank you. Last but not least, Senator Sherrod Brown.
Thanks, Leader Schumer. We've watched over the last 13 months right around the corner insurance company lobbyists and Wall Street lobbyists and drug company lobbyists and oil company lobbyists scurry in and out of Senator McConnell's office trying to write a health care repeal law, trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act, giving away a tax break to the richest Americans. More than 80% of that tax cut goes to the wealthiest 1%, and we know that tax law will actually mean more companies will shut down in Cleveland and Mansfield and Zanesville and move overseas. There's even more incentives to do that. Yet, at the same time, as those lobbyists scurry in and out of Senator McConnell's office, a Republican House, a Republican Senate, a Republican President, a Republican Supreme Court, they've still not been able to run this government with any kind of long-term budget. At the same time, they've ignored the pension needs of literally over 1 million Americans, Teamsters, carpenters, iron workers, mine workers, confectionery workers, literally over 1 million workers, 50,000 Teamsters in my state alone, another 5,000 coal miners in my state alone. These are people, and I know this is Econ 101 for some of my colleagues, but what they don't want to think about, because they don't really ever go to a union hall, is to understand that these are workers over the last 20 and 30 and 40 years that sat down at the bargaining table and gave up higher wages today to put money aside for pensions 20, 30 years down the road. Well, what's happened is Wall Street, in large part, squandered a lot of that money. So these workers that work 40 years, they don't expect a 40% pension cut. That's why this is so important. That's what we need to do. I was encouraged over the weekend. I had lots of conversations with colleagues both sides of the aisle. I had a meeting in my office with several senators talking about the importance of what we can do with pensions. This is not a partisan issue. I assume that when I speak to Teamster rallies or mine worker rallies in Ohio, that just as many of them voted for Trump as voted for Clinton. I don't care about that. These are Ohio workers. These are Ohio retirees. It's time we did our job and fixed it.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Nancy, go ahead.
These progressive groups that say you should have held out for more, do they have a point?
Well, look, we're very pleased with how things came out. We're a lot better off today when it comes to the cause of Dreamers than we were 4 or 5 days ago. We've gotten a commitment from Senator McConnell, trust but verify, but he made it not just to Democrats but to a good chunk of his own caucus. So that means a lot. And I think we have renewed momentum. The Dreamer issue, which everyone supported but is much more highlighted. So we're very pleased with how it worked out. When there's a Republican president, a Republican Senate, a Republican House that are quite recalcitrant against Dreamers, you're not going to get it all at once, but we're going to keep fighting, and we believe we will have a good victory.
You mentioned that and perhaps limits on leverage. Would you consider the list of things that have to be done, whether it be caps, disaster, completely contingent on a DACA deal, as in, if not one, then the others?
We're going to try to get them all done together. Leader McConnell has said that. We've said that. We'd like to get them all done. We think we can.
What about, we're hearing a lot in the past day or so here about the FBI and these texts. Do you view that as an effort on the other side of the aisle to try to pull attention away from the Mueller review?
I think there has been a great deal of activity on the other side intending to either divert attention from Mueller or even stand in his way. I don't think that Mr. Nunes has played a constructive role, to say the least, and we're all worried about it. Mueller has to be allowed to do his job. I have faith in him. As long as he goes forward, everyone will abide by where he comes down. But he shouldn't be thwarted in any way, and the diversion that they're trying to do, both with Mueller and with others, is not good for the country. Yes, way in the back.
Why did you withdraw your offer to fund the wall?
Because that was part of a package. It was the first thing the President and I talked about was finishing it by, as he said, Tuesday night. 3 days. And the thought was that we could come to an agreement that afternoon. The President would announce his support, and then the Senate and House would get it done, and it would be on the President's desk. He didn't do that. So we're going to have to start on a new basis, and the wall offer is off the table.
President Trump said that the CR is a big win for Republicans and that Democrats completely caved. What's your response?
I think we advanced the ball for the Dreamers. We're proud of the role we played. If they're proud of the role of thwarting Dreamers, most Americans would disagree with that. Last one.
Leader Schumer, Special Counsel Mueller interviewed Attorney General Jeff Sessions. You talked about Mueller's investigation, how important that is. What is the significance of him actually interviewing a member of the president's cabinet? And also, do you think that President Trump, seeing what you've seen, might have obstructed justice?
I think we ought to get to the bottom of it. I would leave the investigation to Mueller and not second guess it, and to the legal attorneys after they review President's actions, whether he did obstruct. But certainly the American people overwhelmingly think Mueller ought to be allowed to do his job. And there are a whole lot of forces in the Republican firmament trying to stop him from doing his job. That is not what America is all about. No person is above the law. Thank you.